We know. So 6 people are in the waiting room. Let's have a look. View. Mike Decker. Ray Pettit. There'll be loads tonight because it's you.
Thanks.
Yeah. So no pressure. Mark bloody Harrington. Oh, I've got to remember it's recording, haven't I? Oh, he was ringing Catherine up yesterday. I need it now. I need to know. It's like, you don't need to know. Yeah, so there's 14 there.
Hello. Hello. Just want to allow it in.
Of course. It's a house full tonight, Peter.
Oh, I just realised this. Everybody was here. This Fox fella told me he was going to watch it on Zoom.
No, I said it, I could see if Zoom was working.
Oh, I see.
And Zoom is not working on. Just now that I've
Andy Nash is there as well.
to the internet, the site manager is asking, is the Wi-Fi okay now? Well, the answer is no. So I'm now telling you.
There's a lot of places having bother at the moment.
You'll need to plug your brain cell in because we are going back 50 years.
Hey,
so
I was spending this afternoon in the Woodley Times thinking, when did X happen? You know, the last time we had 4 trains doing the turnaround at Delga, you know, before the Hull excursion of 1974 or something.
well, it must have been no later than 75, wasn't it?
Did we do one in the spring of 75?
Something like that, yeah, because it had to stop when the loops came in because we have the greater capacity to move things around quicker.
Yeah. But it sort of did. Not that, you know, it's the end of the world. Gosh.
I know we haven't quite worked out how to do that strobe thing that you can do, that Andy Nash was showing us how to do, where you end up with the tunnel and you in the middle of it. You can do it, but not with a laptop.
So the idea was to do roughly an hour or thereabouts, and then, you know, even if it creeps on an hour and 5 or hour and 10, and then we've got a little time after that for Q&A if there is anything.
Well, on the last 2, because I've been editing the other ones, the last 2, the Q&A ended up with about 20-25 minutes. So, and you get the stuff a bit late because you can't see as we're going along the what's in the chat. If it's there, it hides it.
Yeah.
And we've got to remember Mike Decker doesn't live in Wisconsin.
No. Bless him.
He worked there. Where the hell's he live now? He's in
North Dakota.
Somewhere in the middle.
Yeah. But they've just finished, according to Facebook, they've just tested one of the engines this week that they've been restoring. But not the one that looks more like a modern American engine. Not the sort of pretty little 440s. But I thought as he was into it, I thought I better stalk what they're seeing in case anything appears. Right. Usually what happens.
So what's it? This is your camera on there, isn't it?
Yeah.
Yeah. And what are you going to do? You're going to pictures there. That's the nominal
like
screen.
If you're using a projector.
Yeah, that'll be projected.
Yeah, but it's just so you can see it a bit bigger if there's more. Like last week when we were all crouching around the laptop. But it was also
well, I'll be spot on in the end.
Yeah, when you do the AGM and you've got the big screen in the car park and all that sort of thing.
Well, I went to the Coral the other January before it all fits up, and they got my little doodah, you know, giving the same sort of spiel as we gave the other week, on a projector at the back of the Coral. And when you were stood on the stage next to it, the definition was good enough.
Yeah.
And you thought, bloody, what projector is it? You know.
I suggested it to Chase this afternoon. And big screen, no.
Oh, yeah.
Right. We'll let them in. And remember not to swear because the editing makes it very hard. There we are. So good evening, everyone, and welcome to the archive talk this evening. If you haven't already muted your microphones, please do mute your microphones. We don't want any one-show domestics or anything like that going on in the background, although I think it's Olympics at the moment. Can everyone hear us okay? Thumbs up, Will Smith, if you can. Excellent. Right. So this evening, we'll go to share screen. And we'll hide you all because no one wants to see us. And we head to start slideshow. Go there. So this evening, we've got a different speaker tonight. We have Trevor Stockton, who seems to be one of the best placed people to tell us about what happened here in the intervening years. We've also got in the archive room, we've got Peter Van Zeller, we've got Dave Simpson, and because his Wi-Fi is not working, we've got Robert Fox as well. So we might go off at tangents. If we do, please bear with us. It's all useful information, and Dave will not. If it's going to behave. There we are.
There we are. Right. Well, we're back end of 1971, and Northern Chiefs arriving at Ravenglass for some trials from the Romney Railway. But the little story really starts if you do a little bit of digging and research, and we were kind of around in them days volunteering, but not necessarily party to everything that was going on. But there was rumours that they were looking at building another steam locomotive. About a year or so before this, in 1970, Douglas mentioned it in the magazine, and the name Sir Arthur Hayward was first mentioned, and that Tommy Jones, who just retired as chief engineer, was looking into doing some early drawings of this locomotive. And believe it or not, it was possibly going to be a 462 tank engine, because at the time we hadn't got rid of the notion that we were going to build a branch line to Muncaster Castle. There would be no turntable, and in fact this tank engine would be the prime mover for the Muncaster extension. So that kind of started the story, but then obviously, as I say, we have Northern Chief here, turned up to do these trials right at the end of the 1971 season. Now, as is easy to research back in the ratty magazines, there was a degree of success, and we learnt quite a little bit about the comparable engines between the Paxmans of River Esk and the Paxmans of Northern Chief. You've got to understand that the railway is a totally different railway to what it is today. A lot of things need to be considered in these trials, not only the bore and stroke and the wheel diameter and how much steam pressure you've got, but our little railway was still being rebuilt. So the Romney engines had a slightly different profile on the driving wheels to our engines. Our railway line would have at least 3 different weights of rail from Ravenglass to Dalegarth, and this little visitor had to contend with all this different weights of rail and its wheel profile trying to grip the weight of the rail. So from my experience of the day I was here and the reports and the accounts, and obviously Terry Warewell, the driver that came with it, has recounted on, there's Terry there on the footplate, recounted on many occasions that it was a good one when the rail was dry and everything was going for you, but if it was a wet, horrible day and the rain set in, you were struggling. There was no sanders on the Romney engines, and of course, you know, if you've got sand, you can pretty well go up anywhere and down anywhere. Plus the combination of the stock that the engine was towing around, you'll see from photographs as we roll on, there's a mixture of opens and saloons. the opens would tend to be all plain bearing stock, so there's a lot of rolling resistance for this engine as well. As you can see from the FUG, coal was used a lot of the time. They did try coke for a while, but this engine is superheated, whereas our River-esque on the left is just a saturated boiler, and there was concern that with coke burning, it wasn't necessarily doing the superheater elements any good. There was 1 or 2 weeps and leaks as time went on, and also a minor derailment on the first run out as it came back through Spout House. I believe the tail was a tender wheel came loose on its axle. I don't know how true that is, but at the same time as doing trials, was also fitting it in with a narrow gauge gathering, and I think this is what we're seeing here is a lot of visitors from other railways visiting to make sort of a good weekend out of having a visiting engine in steam as well as our own. The idea was for all our steam locomotive drivers to have a go on the Romney engine, as you can see there. Graham with us at the time would be just about finishing driving River Mite and gone on to relief driving work by then. He's obviously having a play there. And as I say, the idea was to try and get some feel of what a 462 steam locomotive was, with a superheated boiler, 25.5-inch wheel diameter, something like that, as opposed to our 18-ish on the Esque. And it was to learn something from Douglas's early ideas about building a Sir Arthur Heywood into what we eventually know as his Northern Rock. And you can see there the engine's got a massive string of open carriages behind it, brewing up with a good coal fire on. Terry's oiling round, and they're obviously setting off for an expedition up the valley. I can't recall how many miles the engine did now, but it got a good run while it was here. And obviously as Terry got used to the line more so, and they got a bit more used to getting it up and back without too many problems.
Sorry to interrupt, it's just some of the guys in the chat are asking if you could make the photos full screen. We're getting about half screen at the moment.
Are you? That's interesting.
We're all seeing your preview screen as well, Trevor.
Hang on, let's see what we can do. We may have to adjust something here because we're trying new technology tonight. Let's see what, does that make it any better?
Yes. A lot better.
A lot better. Right, okay.
Cracked it.
We've cracked it.
So here we've got a shot of the 2 Paxman engines leaving Ravenglass with the River-esque leading. Probably buried somewhere under the steam will be Glyn Wells, River-esque's regular driver at the time. And obviously with any theatre of that occasion, there's spectators standing by the camping coaches watching the train get underway. In the rain. And somebody's walked across to the other side of Muncaster Mill platform to see them hoofing it through the station, no doubt with every opportunity to get up the Millwood being double-headed. And then we move on now to the sort of early days of what we're going to do next, which is looks rather like where is the foundry? Heathcote at Cleator and the early days of casting parts for what would become Northern Rock, as yet an unnamed locomotive, although it was gaining a bit of mileage, shall we say, with the Sir Arthur Heywood. And on the right there are the frames that came to Ravenglass. As you can see, we've gone for what is going to be nominally a 262 locomotive. You can see from the back that the layout of the back frames, it'll have a Katatsu truck on it, much like the River Mite did. So you know the whole idea was when the locomotive was built was it was incorporating the best ideas of previous 15-inch gauge engines. So what we'd learnt about bigger wheels, and there are the wheels being pressed there by Ian Page on the left and Ian Smith on the right. So we've gone up to, as I say, we've gone from an 18-inch, nominal 18-inch up to a 20-inch on Northern Rock. As I say, we've gone for a car taxi truck. So there's a better access to the firebox. You can slip the ashpan slide out, knock the fire bars out and be in the firebox in double quick time if you need to be. There's also a radial centre axle on it as well. We'd pick that one up from dear old Sir Arthur Harewood. You know, it still holds to this day for our line, and it's sharp curves. Whereas we've got the flanges turned down on the 282s. We've got all flanges on all of the driving wheels there. And there's Ian Page in what was the old workshop, what was in many moons ago, the carriage shed at Ravenglass, which had morphed into the engineering workshops by 1975-ish when that, well, probably 1974 when that photograph was taken.
You could almost do an evening on just the carriage shed.
Yeah, how it's progressed from one thing to another, yeah.
And that's the joiner shop now. Isn't
That's
it?
where, that's
Yeah.
the joiner shop, yeah. That's looking towards Dalegarth. You're standing with your back to the turntable with when the photograph was taken.
But if you imagine it's half of it, because of stuff Robertson would work at this end. I mean, amazing that they could
Do
all the
anything,
workshop
yeah.
work
Yeah,
in there.
yeah. And there's the frames being dropped onto the wheels, and you can see the car taxi back truck there, ready to receive the frames. And another slightly dull shot again, looking down the workshop towards Dalegarth of the wheel sets and the frames. And that was kind of what we grew up with in the first couple of years, was this set of frames on driving wheels with a boiler sat on the frames, and it kind of sat in the back of what was the diesel shed for what seemed like 18 months or more, with very little progress. And as we'll see as we go on, there was a good reason to bash on with it. And you'll see there that the boiler's again some red oxide paint, and it's Ian Page on the passenger tractor and David Clay stood on the right-hand cylinder as the chassis being propelled out of the workshop, as was up in towards platform 1. And then this is probably a slightly later photograph, as the engine's got cladding on, etc., and is probably one of its initial lifts after either an early steaming or after it's had a year or so in traffic. But that's its first steaming, more or less, devoid of pretty what everything, bar a boiler, a set of wheels, there's some steam pipes. There's no springing. It's River Ertz tender, which is River Ertz new tender behind it, and that's its initial steaming, where it crept out of the station limits, I think, and had a chuff up and down, and everybody was mightily pleased that it was.
I think they went to Mike's. Well, sorry,
they did go somewhere. I'm not
yeah.
entirely sure,
Yeah.
but they did go out of station limits. But everybody was mightily pleased with the results of its initial chuffing up and down. There's Ian Page on the right, David Clay on the left, Chief Engineer Ian Smith behind David, and further back Douglas, all posing, looking as if they're cleaning. Well, they are cleaning the engine, but they're looking as if they're being very industrious while somebody takes some photographs. You've got possibly River Mite on the left and a rejuvenated Perkins just to the top left of the photo. Now that's slightly later, after the commissioning. There's a group of these shots, and that's specially paused when they were trying to build up a kind of a catalogue, a sale catalogue to promote the build of these type of locomotives. So we went out onto the marsh where you've still got the panorama of the high track across the marsh. So it's probably the season after, maybe 78-ish, something like that. And I was specifically asked not to wear a driver's hat, but to sort of sit in the cab, sort of totally still, if you will, but to have a good head of steam. So hence you can see the safety valves are lifting, and to open the regulator and blow steam out of the cylinder drain cocks, so that it looked like it was actually doing something, and it was this mighty, impressive locomotive that you could put your hand in your pocket and buy tomorrow, sort of thing. So that's the commissioning day. I can't just remember the name of the gentleman. It escapes me at the minute.
So Mark Hennig.
Hennig, that was it. So Mark Hennig. Yeah. And that was weekend, which Saturday, 1976. I remember it very well because I was so ill in bed, it was unbelievable. I got the worst bout of flu ever. And I'd even been measured up for my Victorian outfit, which Cyril Holland wore and drove the River Mike that weekend.
That fine bowler hat.
That's it, yeah. So, and that's Ian Smith on the right and Ian Page on the left. Ian Smith had carefully grown a good set of mutton chops. They aren't stuck on ones, they're real. And he grew them specially for the occasion of the sort of Victorian weekend, because in the end, what had pushed the build forward was that the frames, as we saw them earlier on with the boiler and the cylinders, went to Shildon for the celebrations there in 1975, which was 125 years of Stockton Darlington Railway, etc. Would it be 150? Yeah, 150. And then, of course, the next push was, well, it was our passenger centenary in 1976. So there was another good excuse to get this engine finished and out on the line. And there you see Ian blowing the whistle and everything's set for a good run up the line.
What's the other Ian holding?
Sorry?
Is it a staff at that time?
Which
he's showing something that we would be under the Randa control by then, 1976. Although we would be doing it on the phones, we would be very much getting a Randa sheet. So I don't know quite what it is there.
I think it was symbolic.
Symbolic, yeah. That's
Well,
probably
it might
right.
be, because there was a symbolic one
On Mike.
on Mike, which we've got in the
Yeah,
cupboard.
it's probably the same one, just been moving it around.
And this is the successful arrival at Dalegarth. One of the key things about this locomotive is that whilst it developed as time went on, it did run very much out of the box. There was people around, Graham Withers to a certain extent, Ian Smith, still one or two people around who remembered the trials and tribulations of getting the Mite fit for purpose for its inaugural run. So this pretty what ran straight out of the box, but it was an engine built for an old railway. It was still burning coke. It had no air brake equipment on, even though air braking had arrived on the railway by then and had been fitted to some of the diesels and some of the carriages. It had no sanders for the first year. So it was very much of the old railway, and it would develop as the railway developed by the addition of sanders, the addition of air brakes. But the one thing that it did have when it was built and when it ran from new was steam-operated cylinder drain cocks, which was the only one fitted at the time. All the other engines had to rely on the driver judging when the guard was about to blow the whistle, jump off the footplate, shut the cylinder drains, and hope that was it until they got to Dalegarth. Any dallying around at Urton Road when we ran the relief trains, where you'd sometimes have to sit for 10 and 15 minutes prior to the 1976 introduction of Randa base and the loops, meant that you sometimes had to sit at the loops and sit and open the cylinder drain cocks by hand with the other locos. But with this one, it had these beautiful steam-operated cylinder drain cocks, which I used to annoy Peter and George and everybody else with when I ran into Urton Road by giving them a quick flick open and it went and then shut them again. And I was indicated something from the footplate of the other engines, which is
Two trains
or something. Yeah. This is a paused shot that was the cover of the very first Whistler DVD that we did. Well, Graham Whistler did in 1989. I think it came out in 1990. But interestingly, by now it's gained another air pump, slightly different to the one that it had in the past. And this was a Michael Satow designed pump, which we hadn't seen before. It was fitted to Northern Rock as a trial, as they were wanting to buy some, particularly to fit one on the Japanese Rock. Fantastic, lovely bit of kit. You could turn it on and it worked straight away without gushing gallons of exhaust out of everywhere. But it only seemed to run for a trip and then it would start to give bother. It wasn't until we discussed things between chief engineers and the general manager and one thing that we found out that better off working horizontal, not vertical. And it had been simply an error, a genuine error. All our pumps were mounted vertically, therefore we'll mount this one vertically. And sure enough, when they were laid down flat, they seemed to work better. So that's a sort of about 1989 shot. By then, the locomotive had obviously been running 14, 15 seasons, banging in 4,500 to 5,000 miles a year. It got its sanders fitted, air brakes fitted. The biggest challenge with the air brakes on Northern Rock was deciding where to site the air tank receiver, because it was between the frames for a while, but was most inaccessible for air leaks. So it got moved around the back of the tender about 3 different times, I think, in the space of a few years. But there she is, stood in the yard, all bulled up for yet another publicity shot. We're probably jumped back again a little bit now, because we're obviously nose into the carriage shed with a green open carriage. But the thing that slightly dates it is the radio set that you can see in the cab, the grey radio set, and that was the first Redifon radio sets that were fitted to the locomotives from 1977 season onwards. So you're probably talking 77, 78-ish there, possibly.
I only bought it from eBay last week.
All right.
I thought I'd throw it in.
Is the bracket getting ready for air pumps to be fitted on the smoke box?
Well, the tale there is it's probably the pump's been taken off to be fettled.
Right. Okay.
It's probably we've probably been stuffed in there, out of the way.
Yeah.
The engineer has taken the pump away on a bagging trolley, and it was await further orders. And there we are, just on a typical day, spinning round at Dalegarth. We've by now gained the air tank on the side of the tender. We've gone from plain bearing bogies under the tender to roller bearings. And gradually, as I say, that the engine, like the rest of the fleet, improved as the years went by. Like all the other engines, when it was built, it had 2 3/4-inch bore live steam injectors, which Peter will testify with them. It was like you banged them on, dropped the pressure by 20 pounds and knocked them off again. It wasn't until much later when we got the 1/2-inch bore ones that we learnt to deal with them a bit better, and you can to this day bang them on and leave them on for mile after mile after mile, and the steam pressure will hold against what you're doing if you've got your summary right.
Trevor, was that as a result of staying on Northern Chief?
Because it's got the writing on the side of the tender.
Yeah.
Someone's just asked, was that a result of? Just repeat your question again.
It's Andy Nash here from Romney. Hi, Trev. Most Romney engines have 1/2 and 1 3/4-inch injector, and I wonder if that's where the idea came from, because we just turn the left-hand one on and leave it on all the time we're running normally.
It's possible. It's possible. As I say, ours, as you probably remember, or you've been told, the whole of our fleet was sort of rather agricultural, I think, compared to the Romney engines. The burning of the coke, the cleaning of the fires, and the banging on of the feeds. When you're going up the line, as Peter said when we were talking once, that the whole idea after a year or two of engine driving in the 70s was trying to get the first trip as good as the second trip, as good as the third trip in a day. And if you went home at night having had 3 good trips, you knew you were getting somewhere. So yes, it's quite possible it came from there, but it would have taken some time to evolve, because certainly when the Rock was built, it was like the others, and it had 3/4-inch bore live steam. Now we've got a shot again, we've jumped back in time a little bit. This is the cavalcade of 76, drifting down the bank between the 2 bridges at the Green. So Estelle Green Bridge is to our left as we're approaching. There's me standing up, trying to make a little bit of room for my father sat in the middle, and the former chief engineer Tommy Jones on the left. And we were part of a grand cavalcade making our way down the line. Everybody and his aunt and uncle were there back in 76, including Harry Clarkson, who Tommy spotted on the station. Tommy had already been lined up to have a ride with me back to Ravenglass, and was more than happy to join my dad on the footplate. But he spotted Harry Clarkson and said, "Oh, now come on, Trevor." He said, "Let's be getting out of here. I don't want to talk to him." And so that's a tale for another day.
Oh, yeah. It came round the engine, I was on the mic.
And then obviously much later, shot of a very bulled up Northern Rock in the station at Ravenglass. You probably, maybe into my early days of sitting upstairs driving a desk and desperately wanting to get back downstairs and drive a steam engine.
I just threw that in.
Yes.
It's a beautiful shot.
Yeah.
It's so well confirmed.
Yeah, springtime in Ravenglass.
And it does just show, doesn't
What
it?
colour is it?
Peter,
You weren't going to mention.
Sam's going to explode down in Seascale. But we
Yellow.
can clearly see it's green in this
Green
picture,
again.
can't we? Yes.
It's absolutely green.
Yeah.
Yes. And here we have a modern day Northern Rock, since the introduction of Willem Beck. Lamps seem to be the in thing.
Well, and the COVID screens are in place.
The COVID
so, yeah.
screens are in place, so date that quite well. And this is last Christmas with Santa hitching a lift and keeping himself very warm in a cold climate.
Yes, he had to be carefully removed to get in the engine shed on the night time.
Right.
Door.
Yeah. Now then, yeah, you have to remind me on this one. This is
starting on Rock.
This will be Rock 2, so this will be the boiler being pressed at Newton's. That's it.
Yeah,
That's
Gordon Newton on the right.
Gordon Newton Senior, as it were. Yeah, that's right. And there it's showing it pressed up to 300 odd psi with nothing weeping. And there it is, looking very much like the original Northern Rock, sat in what is now the new workshop, pre-2013, before it was all rebuilt. So we're looking down on the single road that went from sort of north to south, if you will, and it's in the welding bay end, if you call it that, the south end of the workshop, sat there on a couple of wee wagons. And there's Ian Page, having helped put the first one together, very much involved in dropping the boiler into the frames, be 1989-ish. And again, you can't tell the difference really to the untrained eye. It's another Northern Rock coming together. And there's Mr. Nagai, who at the time was president of a, now then I can't get this right, but it was an model engineering business in Japan. But he'd obviously picked up on, you know, our worldwide publicity of trying to sell this Northern Rock class engine, and he'd come forward to Douglas in 1988, looking to place this order, and would call himself the importer for the railway. In other words, the railway at Shizenji was the importer. So there he is, proudly leaning against the boiler of Northern Rock 2. And there it is, jettisoned out into the north end, between the north end of the workshop and what was the museum compound. More than likely because there was something else going on, some great big hoo-ha, and it was in the way, so it got pushed out in the rain whilst they repaired something else. And somebody's taken the opportunity to take some lovely shots of it, obviously minus smoke box. But there it is, coming together, getting the fixtures and fittings attached to it. As you say, it's just a few little detail differences with the plumbing, but essentially the layout's very much the same with the reverser on the right. Not a lot else to say other than, as I say, just the little fixtures and fittings with detail differences. And that's the day of the commissioning with Ian Smith there with the red tie on, stood to the left. Tony Nunn was fetched in as an extra assistant engineer because obviously trying to push on building yet another locomotive in among 1,000,001 other little projects that were going on at the time. And, you know, obviously to have to meet a deadline. Ian Page on the right, David Clay again, bottom left, and a very young Graham King, who probably doesn't look much different to this day, on the front right there. The bunting's out and everybody's expecting a good time. And there's the original Northern Rock. Start watching the other one running in. We didn't actually intend to have the original Northern Rock in steam. It was something that sort of, like we do with a lot of these things, it sprung up at the last minute. It was in quite a few bits and pieces. I can't recall whether it was either about to be stripped down to have an overhaul, or whether it had work done on it and in a minor fashion and was in bits. But I think between us, I think you may not remember, but you may not remember, Peter, but between us, we somehow cobbled it back together because Ian, you know, more or less said we'll get on with it, but we you know, we haven't got a lot of time to spend on it. So it's obviously minus its air pump, but we bulled it up and got it cleaned up, looking something like for the few days that it was relevant while the other engine was in steam. And there's Douglas Ferreira with the bottle of fizz, ready to help Mr. Nagai let the fizz go to christen the locomotive. I believe there was a few trials with bottles of water, empty bottles. Yeah. And I think Douglas commented that at least it all worked very, very nicely, and the bottle cracked as it should have done, unlike the launching of ships at times, was his comment.
And with all those photographers there, we haven't got a single shot of the bottle actually exploding.
No, right. Yeah.
We may improve on it later.
Yeah.
On.
Yeah.
That's the closest I think we've got.
Because the buffer bin was so sticky. The paint went on about 3 o'clock in the morning. I'm just not.
Sorry, it's Matt again. You said there's no photo. Isn't there some video of it? Because I remember on the old video in the museum, there was a brief shot of it, the bottle breaking.
It's possible that Whistler's got someone tacked on the end of one of his Northern Rock ones, if you check. I'm sure it might be something.
Was it on the old museum video that used to run like on a 5-minute repeat? At the very end, there's a bit of footage of the 2 Northern Rocks. And there's a brief, like 3-second shot of the bottle being smashed against the front cover.
All right.
Right.
I'm still working on the stills. I haven't got to movies yet.
Sorry for jumping in. Yeah, it's on the 1989 Graham Whistler DVD.
Yeah.
Thank you, Ryan.
No problem.
So here we see Mr. Nagai very proudly holding a railway lamp that had been presented to him. He pulled the curtain back to reveal Northern Rock 2. You can see just under his arm there the horizontal steam pump, and we had a completed Northern Rock 2. I always rather like the fact that they managed to, as near as damn it, follow the original. But if you put the 2 side by side, it wasn't quite the same to me. you know, I've always had the fondness for the original, and they didn't quite hit the mark with it. There was one or two little bits and pieces that didn't sit right with me, but that's just a personal thing. I think they did a marvelous job, because the problem was, as we looked earlier on in the show, the original Northern Rock was built in the little old workshop of the carriage shed as was. And the joke was that the plans got left behind when they swept the floor and moved out. And when they were building this locomotive, it wasn't unknown for you to roll in on the turntable on a 20-minute turnaround to be met by a fitter with a tape measure, busy measuring you up for a new suit, sort of thing, as they were busy trying to build this engine. But as I say, it was a fine job when it was finished, and everybody was pleased with it. But as ever, you know, deadlines are deadlines, and it met the deadline. And there's Mr. Nagai with a steam hat on.
I think there was a gentleman commissioned to make full drawings of it as we were building it.
Yeah,
But they built two.
Yeah,
It was still halfway through the.
that's right. Yeah, we do have a full set now. Yeah, yeah. And there's Mr. Nagai at the regulator of the engine with David Clare to the left, and our own Northern Rock in the background, and a cheery wave.
I quite enjoyed that.
Yes, absolutely, for the cameras. And there we are on one of the runs at Dalegarth. I think that's you, Peter, in the background. You're probably chasing it around with a paintbrush, were you, or something?
Well, it was dry by then.
Yeah.
Fire in it.
Yeah. And there it is, paused on a wet day at Dalegarth.
I think that might still be the commissioning.
Is it? Yeah.
Guy, behind on the right.
Yeah. Yes, that's right. Yeah. Yeah.
And the lamps.
Yeah.
Well, it
Yeah.
didn't linger.
No. No.
This was soon after the start of the working week in January, and it was due in the boat to go out there.
Very, very quickly.
Yeah.
Yeah.
We've got that, I think.
Yeah.
somewhere.
And there we are, heading back to Ravenglass.
How did she perform when compared to the original?
Sorry.
How did she?
How did it perform compared to the original?
Personally, I don't know. I only drove it round the yard, moving it about. I would imagine on our line it was much the same. I mean, out in Japan, it was a totally different ball game, which we'll come to in due course.
Thanks.
But there's the two engines stood side by side, paused probably for the last time ever. Although there are
Never
people,
say never.
never say never, but there are people hankering for the, you know, for them to come back. And
Someone wants to take his out there.
Yeah.
well, yeah, good luck. Yeah. And there's the locomotive. Looks rather as if it's been greased up to a degree with the motion. Looks rather greased up, as if it's about ready to go into the container. And a final shot in the evening sunshine in the yard. Double heading. I don't know whether we've a shot of it. There we go. That's the manic run to Miteside, is that? We decided we would have one double-headed blast to Miteside, and the chief executive at the time, Ronald Coyne, was not impressed. Kind of grudgingly let us do it, but they were absolutely having kittens that in case anything broke, because as Peter's just said, it was pretty close to dropping the fire, being loaded in a box and being sent to the other side of the world. But we did have a good thrash up Millwood that afternoon. Mr. Whistler caught it on camera, and it does enduringly last on a piece of tape somewhere.
Not saying anything about the colour in that one.
No,
Nothing at all.
the sun's caught it, hasn't it?
The linings disappeared as well.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. And there we go, on its way. Now, bearing in mind, the railway had never done anything like this before, and it was before the days of emails and this and that and the other. All this was done by fax or facsimile, as Mr. Nagai said. and he was most insistent that he wouldn't place an order for a second locomotive, i.e. Cumbria, which we'll come to in the future, until the company installed their own facsimile machine, because up until then all the faxes were collected from a post office or something in Millen, and he thought this was very much old hat and not very good business to have this facsimile machine in Millen. So when you consider that it was all done by snail mail, etc., etc. The other thing as well is that, to be fair to our guys, they were under a lot of pressure to get this engine finished and out there as the done thing. It was a showpiece. If it worked, we would get other orders, which subsequently we did, etc., etc. Benefit of hindsight, the boiler was drained, but we could have done more to drain other parts of the locomotive, as we'll come to with the bits of problems we had when we got out to Japan. And this thing had been kind of sweating in a tin box for 2 months or so. Yeah.
I think we should place on record Andrew Graham of Harrington, who was a helper at the time in the paint shop, and me and him were cataloguing all the spares that had to go with it, right down to the last gauge class piece of packing, because on the inventory that went with it, everything had to be there with Japanese customs.
Yeah.
So we laid everything out. We did a handwritten copy of the list. We sent it to Barbara to type it on the official customs indent, and came back and we checked it off one item at a time. Or 6 big springs, gauge classes, and a customized oil can. Customized oil can. He painted up this lovely oil can, lined it out, and then he'd added this on the end of the customs indent in short. And then Barbara typed it in, so it was on the list. It had to go, and it went absolutely beautiful. But how can you say? Very cunning.
And the reason
if he'd have asked, somebody would have said no.
The reason for the customised oil cap was it was the one off the valve spindle oil, wasn't it?
The
little one.
Yeah.
The little caps that you take off.
Oh, well, this was a tin.
There's also extra caps made. Do you not remember them?
Right.
Because I dropped one when I was oiling Northern Rock round. It went down between the frames, and the guy was most aghast that what happens if they dropped one in Japan off Northern Rock too, and they didn't have another, and so there was some of those made. One thing, another. Anyway, we've now moved on, I think, where it looks like Cumbria.
Yeah. We got a fax machine by then.
Yes, we got a fax machine by then. No expense was spared. And we had a fax machine installed in the office.
Do you remember when they asked about the ash pit?
Yeah.
They wanted to know what an ash pit looked like.
Yeah.
So somebody had to send a drawing of a hole in the ground to Millen on the train for it then to be transmitted 7,000 miles by electronics.
Well, the detail when we did the original engine and they sort of followed us around with Northern Rock was, how many shovels of coal you put on the fire when you light it in the morning, how many sticks of wood do you use, how long does it take to raise 50 pounds of steam. There's an amazing amount of detail gone into with our Northern Rock as we were building the Northern Rock too. They wanted to know everything. You couldn't fob them off with anything, you could, we just throw an armful in, and with 10 shovels, no, how many, please show, you have to demonstrate, all that kind of thing. So there was all that level of detail gone into with the first engine, as Sir Peter said, with the spares, and the guy would have been absolutely nailed on wanting to know what we needed, what was likely to go wrong, if anything. Because as we'll lead on, maybe not tonight, but another time, out in Japan, they weren't over blessed with tools and machinery because they just expected this engine to run straight out of the box type of thing. So here we've got Cumbria, what was initially called Northern Rock 3 in our magazines. Mr. Ogawa, who was the traffic manager of, if you will, of the railway out in Shizenji, on the left, shaking hands with Ian Smith, the chief engineer. On the right, there's Mr. Nagai just to his left. I'm not quite sure who the lady is.
She was from the tourist board.
Tourist board, is it?
Mrs. Van something.
And then obviously Douglas in the background, and that's at the south end of the workshop as we used to know it. And there's Mr. Nagai proudly patting what was Cumbria on its safety valves. And there's Ian Smith busy working on the smokebox saddle detail with David Clay, I think it is, in the background, attending to Riveresque.
Are these post pictures? Because they don't look quite natural.
No, I think this
press.
Yeah, this was press once. Yeah,
So they appeared on the Icelandic eBay site.
Yeah.
Recently.
Yeah.
I've got the name of the guy.
Yeah.
Can't tell you.
You know, it's quite possible that with the engine stood on the spur on the left, it's all been staged at the last minute. You know, they probably wouldn't be intending to work on it that day. Obviously, the ESC minus its tender with Sheila in the background is the priority, and that's been popped in there for them to pose. And there is what was to become Cumbria stood out in the yard, and again, at first glance, it's just Northern Rock again. And there we are with the red frames, copper cap chimney, starting to look something. And there it is in its first guise with the, again, River Erts high mileage tender tied on behind it, looking rather splendid. Everybody was rather taken by the detail finish. So much, you know, to a ratty engine driver, it's a ratty engine, but it looks so different, so sweet. There's a high running board and the red frame and the paint on the frames and such like, and the extra, the polishing, Peter, the polishing, could we have kept up with it?
Yeah. But it was nicely worked.
Oh yeah, it's lovely work, yeah, absolutely.
It's a handsome beast.
Absolutely, yeah. And again, just detail differences with the fittings in the cab, from obviously from our home engine and Northern Rock too. And there she is, finished with its own tender, puffers, air braking, lamp, etc. Stood at Urton Road, going up the valley.
That triggered a memory from 70 years earlier of remembering that Greenley was there with Esk.
Yeah, there you go. Yeah,
Almost the same place.
yeah.
So I had to throw that one.
Yeah.
Sorry, carry on.
No. And there's another paused shot, running officially wrong line at Fisher Ground going up the valley. That's possibly because we used to switch all the loops out in the winter time when there's no Santa trains, etc. Fisher Ground, we jumped back a little bit. It's got the Erts tender on it there, still short of air braking, etc., etc. It's on another test run, and much the finished article posing in the winter sunshine at Dalegarth. And on its return, see, it's got a number 2 on the buffer beam. Northern Rock 2 went out with a number 1 on the buffer beam. You know, such is life. And there stood the naming day outside the engine shed.
Had you finished painting by then, Peter?
Hmm?
Had you finished painting by then?
No, I've got a lot more time to do it.
Oh, right.
There is a little story though. I got given it to run in, and I handled it like the proverbial
You would.
careful,
Yeah.
don't break it, kids club. And the weekend before it was open, there were some people from the Japanese news media or something who couldn't come on the Monday for the opening. So they promised them a ride out, and they came on the Saturday. And Ian Smith drove it, and coming down into my side, it developed a knock because something had been stressed, and thankfully it was stressed 2 days before it was opening. There was a flaw in the casting of the crosshead, and something parted, not enough to sort of disable the engine.
Yeah.
And they were able to mend it for the opening day and get all the dimensions right for some new ones from the foundry at Carlisle. But, you know, was I thankful that I hadn't done it, and B, it was going to happen, it happened in England. Not that they would have been my trouble, but somebody would have been troubled. It went out there and it performed when it got there.
When it got there.
Yeah.
Yeah. And there she's on the turntable at Ravenglass. By now I would have my David Mosley hat on and be tearing my hair out because I've got this engine running around the railway that wants to perform at different times of the day on different days of the week, and I'm trying to relay the railway or back sleep or something or change rails, and you know, you'd get in the morning, it'd be, can we have some occupation? And there we are with Steam Northern Rock again, and this would now be under the care of Neil Dickinson on Northern Rock, and Cumbria is about to be named. And there's the Right Honourable Willie Whitelaw about to christen the locomotive.
Peter Hensman in the
Peter Hensman in the
left-hand
background.
side, yeah.
I haven't included the shot where Willie is obviously thinking, what a waste.
Yeah, 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 that's right.
Well,
And there we go,
There we go.
christening.
And this one, we actually have the bottle.
oh, brilliant.
Go.
Bingo, there we go.
Not entirely in focus, but at least
No.
it's actually
Yeah.
breaking up.
And there's just a guy posing with Willie Whitelaw and other dignitaries. Is our Northern Rock on the left. And whilst there's obviously a tale to tell in Japan, it's remarkable to think that we're looking at something that happened virtually 30 years ago now, and we didn't build any more. We never got any more orders for anything else. I took Northern Rock to the Bure Valley Railway in September, I think it was, of 1990, when that railway was in its infancy, with the whole idea of selling the Northern Rock design to the Bure Valley Railway. But for various circumstances, their history jumped about a lot for different owners, and they ended up with the ZBs that they've got. There was never a sniff of an order from down there. So there's Cumbria being loaded into the container at Ravenglass, off to meet its sister locomotive on the other side of the world.
Now, this is the point. Do you wish to do questions, or do you wish to touch on Sugenji?
Well, probably Shigenji's something for another night, isn't it?
I would
Otherwise, we're
think
going
so,
to get yeah.
There will be questions.
I know that.
See who's here, and we'll also have a look in the chat now.
Gosh.
There'll be people telling us that you couldn't see everything, so we can skip those ones. And Andy Nash commented 2 Romney locos in this shot, number 15 too. So I imagine he means Shida of Estelle.
Ah, right.
Right back at the beginning. When, for those who don't know, Romney, its call sign is number 15.
Right.
You might get it back eventually. I don't know. Do you want it back?
You look after it nicely, like you are doing.
We know where it is.
We'll tell you some
know where
stories
you are.
about it later.
There was talk about, I mean, I would say at the time, it was almost as if Benny Romney